Imagine, if you will, a podcast. A podcast beyond that which is known to man. It exists in both fandom and discovery, in viewing and critiquing. My name is Matt Hurt. This is Anthology. Hello, and welcome to Anthology, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. If this is your first time listening, Anthology is a podcast exploring science fiction anthology storytelling during television's first golden age, beginning with The Twilight Zone. Each podcast, I share my thoughts on an episode of this iconic series as a first-time viewer, as well as share some trivia about the episode. I then end each podcast with a bonus review of a movie or show related to the week's episode. You can find more of Anthology at anthologypod.com, and if you want to contact me, you can like the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod, tweet me at ObsessiveViewer, send an email to matt@obsessiveviewer.com, or call and leave a voicemail at 317-762-6099. If you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast, please head over to iTunes and leave a rating and review. The more ratings and reviews I get, the easier it will be for people to find the show in iTunes' search results. And if you're feeling particularly generous and want to support Anthology with your wallet, there's a donate button on anthologypod.com, as well as a link to the donate page in the show notes of this episode. Every donation made using that donate button goes directly toward the fees to keep the podcast running and is incredibly appreciated. Today on the podcast, I'll be discussing A Stop at Willoughby. It's the 30th episode of the Twilight Zone's first season, and it aired on May 6th, 1960. And for this week's bonus review, I'll share my thoughts on Patterns, a 1955 Kraft Television Theater episode written by Rod Serling that gave Serling his kind of big break into the world of television writing and film writing as well. But first, I have a couple things I want to address before I get into my review of A Stop at Willoughby. First is that there's a new DVD and Blu-ray set of The Twilight Zone that's available and actually coming out. So the DVD set, I believe, is already available. It's a complete series. I don't know anything about whether or not there's new bonus features or anything new to it. It may just be a repackaging from the distributor, because I know that the previous Blu-ray complete set went out of print. So the DVD set is currently available on Amazon for about $50, which isn't bad. I don't know if it has special features or not, but the Blu-ray set is actually scheduled to come out on December 13th, and the pre-order price right now on Amazon is like $85. And I don't know. I was really excited to get the definitive collection, or the Fifth Dimension DVD collection, and I like it a lot. It's been great to have it and everything. But man, $85 for the complete series on Blu-ray. If it has, I don't know, even if it has just the same bonus features as the set that I have, I might actually upgrade to it, to Blu-ray, because I've noticed that when I watch the DVDs, the image quality isn't as pristine as even the Netflix streaming of it is. And it's not anything that's too bad, or it doesn't detract from the experience or anything, because there are a ton of special features in it. But I mean, I don't know, $85 to have the Twilight Zone on Blu-ray is is not a bad deal at all. I'll make sure I put a link to the Amazon listing in the show notes of this episode for anyone that wants to check that out. And next up, I have a couple listener emails that I want to get to. Mostly feedback on my last episode of Anthology, episode 24, covering Nightmare as a Child. and particularly regarding Terry Burnham, who played Marky in the episode. So the first email comes in from Greg, who's emailed before. He says, Terry Burnham was terrific in this episode. I especially like when Helen asks Marky, understand what, and you can see Marky in the background mouthing Helen's words. I don't know if it was a flub or intentional, but it gives me the creeps in either case. As far as promising child thespians who go nowhere, Terry Burnham's got nothing on Carrie Henn. Whereas Terry has credits before and after the Twilight Zone, Carrie has one credit and one credit only, Aliens. For my money, out of all scary things in Aliens, the facehuggers, the Queen Alien, Sigourney Weaver's mid-80s soccer mom fro, though Weaver herself is awesome, nothing beats the iconic line, they mostly come at night, mostly. In my younger days, i.e. my 20s, if I was about to call it a day and while on my way to bed, I got Henn's slumber party in a cemetery reading of that line stuck in my head, there was the highest probability that I would be tossing and turning all night. Plus, she and Burnham have a knack for the 1,000-yard stare that older artists, with all their method mumbo-jumbo, would struggle to match. I imagine a stop at Willoughby will bring this hot streak of mediocrity you're in to an end. It is pretty great. And that email comes in from Greg once again. And yeah, I didn't notice the kind of creepy background mouthing that Terry Burnham does. And I have to believe that that's just a flub, that's just a child actor, just a flub on the actor's part. It kind of reminds me of a slight tangent here. It kind of reminds me of Kenan Thompson on Saturday Night Live. If you go back and watch some of his sketches that he's in from like his first maybe 4 or 5 years on the show, like he is mouthing the words of everyone that's talking that he's not talking. It is incredibly distracting. But in the context of this and Terry Burnham and Nightmare as a Child, it does kind of lend an extra creepiness to it because she is this weird supernatural entity in the episode that's kind of all-knowing and knows everything about Helen, and that is a nice touch. That's a good observation. Thanks for sharing, Greg. And not to spoil my review going forward, but yeah, Stop at Willoughby definitely did change up my feelings of the Twilight Zone, the later part of season 1 of the Twilight Zone. But more on that later. I have one other email to go through. It comes from Roger, and he says, "Hi, Matt. Just listened to your podcast on Nightmare as a Child. I'm a first-time listener. In any event, I was wondering if you were aware of the rest of the story about Andrew Ramage, the Twilight Zone Museum, and his successful effort to raise funds for a marker for Terry in the Forest Lawn Cemetery in Long Beach. I donated $50 toward this memorial, which was placed fairly recently." And he includes a link to to Terry's page on the Facebook page for the Twilight Zone Museum, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. And he said, "All the best to you with your podcast. I listen to many of the Zone podcasts and am pleased to see how many of them continue to be produced. Roger." All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much for writing in, Roger. And it's funny. I got this email like probably about an hour before I started recording this episode. So he got it right under the wire. And to go into the content of his email here, yeah, there was this great fundraising or I don't think it was a Kickstarter. I think it was not Indiegogo. It was a crowdsourced a fundraiser for Terry Burnham to get a marker for her, a headstone, and it was successful. I think they came just I think $300 shy of their goal, but it was enough to get her a headstone and a nice memorial service, and that's really remarkable. That's actually, I mean, it's really incredible, and this is the kind of thing that makes me so excited to get into the Twilight Zone and to kind of develop this, like me developing this new appreciation or this appreciation for the show that I never got a chance to really consume growing up. Like me discovering the show now and going through it, like things like this just makes it so worth it and so exciting for me, because this is above and beyond. Like, this is incredible from a fan base perspective. Like, you have this actress who appeared in one episode of the fan base's beloved show, who was reclusive, and like the fan base just kind of, got together and did this, and it's really remarkable. And I have the utmost respect for Andrew Ramage and everyone that donated to this amazing cause. It's really incredible, and I'll put a link to everything in the show notes as well. And thanks again, Roger, for writing in and sharing that with me. And I hope you continue listening to the podcast, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, so that is all I have for emails this week, and I'm going to go ahead and get us kicked off with a summary of A Stop at Willoughby, courtesy of the Twilight Zone Companion. Of course, the summary and review going forward are going to be completely spoiler heavy, so if you haven't watched the episode yet, please go on to Netflix or Amazon or your DVD or wherever and watch the episode, and then come back and listen to it if you don't want to be spoiled. Okay, so the plot description reads as follows. During a meeting, Mr. Misrell, Williams' boss, savagely dresses him down for losing an important automobile account. Riding home on the train, Williams has a dream in which he is on a very different train in July of 1880, entering a restful little town named Willoughby, a place, as the conductor tells him, where a man can slow down to a walk and live his life full measure. He realizes that he isn't made for the competitive life, that Willoughby is where he belongs. But when he tries to explain this to his wife, an acquisitive woman who sorely regrets her choice of husband, he receives only ridicule. Ultimately, the pressure of his job causes Williams to crack. When he calls his wife to tell her that he's quitting and to beg her to wait at home for him, she hangs up. On the commuter train, Williams feels devastated, his life in shambles. Miraculously, he suddenly finds himself back in Willoughby, where the townsfolk greet him warmly by name. He's home to stay. Meanwhile, the commuter train has come to a full stop. It seems that Mr. Williams, a regular passenger, shouted something about Willoughby, then jumped off the train to his death. The body is loaded into a hearse. The sign on the back, Willoughby and Son Funeral Home. All right, before I get to my review of this episode, I'm going to do a talent rundown of the cast and crew. Starring in this episode is James Daly as Gart Williams. This was his only episode of The Twilight Zone. However, he does have a connection to Serling in that he appeared in Planet of the Apes. And this is kind of a little anecdotal trivia thing, but he's the father of actress Tyne Daly and actor Tim Daly, who I particularly know very well from Wings, the 90s sitcom that was on CBS. I believe, it was CBS. It's also sort of tied to the Twilight Zone, I guess. Let's see. Co-starring as Mr. Misrell is Howard Smith. This is his first of 2 Twilight Zone episodes. The next we'll see him is in Season 3, Episode 26, Cavender is Coming. And as Jane Williams is Patricia Donahue. This was her only episode of The Twilight Zone. However, she did appear in one episode of science fiction theater in 1956 titled The Phantom Car, and she appeared in a couple episodes of Night Gallery. And let's see... She adopted a child from Vietnam in 1975. That's the piece of trivia I have on her. And let's see, appearing as the train conductor as one of the train conductors is Jason Wingreen. This is his first of 3 Twilight Zones. Next is the Midnight Sun in season 3. He also appeared in 3 Outer Limits, 2 Night Galleries, and he provided the voice of Boba Fett in Empire Strikes Back. And he also appeared in Airplane. Let's see, he passed away in 2015, but one of his final acting credits was in an episode of Seinfeld, which I don't know if I've mentioned this show before, but if you if you're a fan of Seinfeld, I highly recommend checking out Seinecast. It's a fun episode by episode review of Seinfeld by a couple guys who have really good chemistry on the microphone, and one of them is a huge Twilight Zone fan. So anytime there's any kind of crossover on in terms of acting in Seinfeld and Twilight Zone, they always kind of reference it. So it's pretty fun. And writer for this episode was Rod Serling. And he stated that this was his favorite first season episode of the show, and I find that pretty interesting. It seems like a very personal story for him. And rounding out the talent rundown is director Robert Parrish. This is his second of 3 episodes, and last we'll see of him is here in a few weeks for The Mighty Casey. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get into my feelings as a viewer. First of all, before I watch this episode, before I go into that, I like to talk about what I knew about the episode before watching it for the first time. So for this one, I didn't know much. I just knew the title, and I knew that it was about a businessman who imagines a magical world for himself, or a pretend world, and I knew that it had something to do with a train. And I wasn't really surprised, except for the ending. I was surprised by the ending, but this episode delivered exactly what I thought it was going to deliver, and I'm excited to talk about it. So, I'll start off my review by talking about the kind of technical aspects of it. From the outset, the very first scene, the opening shot, is of a boardroom or a conference room that Gart is in with his coworkers and Mr. Mizrael. And from that moment, I really loved the framing of it. The camera is center is perfectly center on the table, and we see just straight in front of us, and in dead center is Mr. Mizrael with a backdrop of New York City in the background. And it's really great imagery. It really brings you into exactly what setting this is and exactly what environment it is. And it really brings us into the tense scolding that Gart undergoes. It brings us into that scenario really well. And then later when Gart is on the train, I really like the snowfall effect. I mean, it's simple. It's really simple and straightforward, but it's done well. There are a lot of snowflakes, I guess, would be my compliment for it. But I also like the implementation of snow into the setting, because it's a really easy way to distinguish Willoughby and the train. It's just such an easy distinction, but I don't know. I liked it. I thought it was a good way to set the tone or set the setting. And later in the episode, when Gart kind of finally comes unglued and he shatters the camera, or not camera, but the mirror in the bathroom, I really like that effect. There's such a habit of characters breaking windows or breaking mirrors or breaking just glass in general in the show, and this comes into play in a really effective way, because you can tell that that's kind of one of the characters, one of the characters' breaking points. And it in particular reminded me of the mirror effect in Mirror Image, and how the main character there used the mirror in the bathroom to kind of peek on her doppelganger. And it really reminded me of the mirror shattering effect in Where Is Everybody, where where Earl Holliman runs into the mirror when he's kind of losing it. Those both Where Is Everybody and A Stop at Willoughby, those sequences share a lot in common there. And finally, for the technical side of the review, there's a decision made I believe it's right before the final sequence where Gart is on the train. But we see that, like, at that point, his life is really, really in shambles, and everything is like he's reached his breaking point. And the scene cuts from his office to the train scene, but it's not him sitting in the seat like normal, like it was earlier in the episode where we cut to him just on the train. But we see him from the reflection in the glass. And like that is the establishing shot of him on the train. And I thought that was such a great way to represent that. Sure, the scene changed to him on the train now, but also just to kind of show that he is not in his world anymore. That while he is physically in that world and mentally in his normal world, he is on an opposite side. He is in another world. He does not belong there. It felt really apt to show his reflection immediately when cutting to that scene, because he's not there anymore. He's not with himself anymore. He's not even in Willoughby yet. He's just not himself, and his body is going to join him, sadly. So to go back to the conference call scene and way back at the beginning, the scene with Mr. Mizrael and the board members or whatever the ad agency setup is, the ad men. I really like the way that the character of Mizrael is just as unappealing and intimidating a figure as he possibly could be. And that as he's just spouting this punishment or verbal punishment and scolding onto Gart, he's like he says push like probably a dozen times, and he ends it on just the camera ends it on this him chanting it's push, push, push down the line, all that. But the camera has a close up to his mouth as he's shouting at him, and that just lands in such a disgusting and grimy way. It shows his lack of empathy, and it makes him so easy to hate right off the bat because he is just relentless, and it just also shows that it hints at that Gart Williams is just does not belong in that world. And like, even when he finds out that the executive that was supposed to have the big automobile account is resigning, like you see, not actually before that, when he calls the secretary to see what the holdup is, like he's favoring his stomach. He does that throughout the whole episode, that he just kind of winces and rubs his stomach, and just showing that he is stressed and he has probably an ulcer because of the job, and just kind of really demonstrating visually that he does not belong in this world, and that he does not belong in this setting. This is not his life that he would have chose for himself. And so after he loses it in such a likable way too. He loses it, and he yells at Mizrael, but even the way that he talks back to him, it's not this big like angry like outburst at him that he's been building up forever. It's just he calls him fat, and tells him to shut up, essentially. And it really speaks to the Gart Williams character, because he's friendly, he's creative, he's kind of a sad sack, but he's a gentle, peaceful person, it seems, or he's a nice person. He has a nice way about him, and it shows that he's not ruthless. He just says it and storms out. He's the antithesis of Mizrael and the standard ad executive. And when he leaves the boardroom and he goes back to his office, he tells his secretary that when she asks if he needs anything, he says a sharp razor and a chart of the human anatomy showing where the arteries are. And on first viewing, that line was pretty funny to me. I thought, oh well, that's kind of a clever quip And kind of a clever comeback, or not comeback, but just a clever quip for him to say in the moment. It's kind of a flashy bit of dialogue, I guess. But, and upon repeat viewings of this episode, that line takes such a dark tone, and it shows that he is at least actively considering suicide, and that's really dark, and that's kind of tragic. And so after that, we get him at his desk, and that's when Serling pipes in with his opening narration. And, usually in the past, I have taken to kind of nitpicking Serling's words a little bit, which is blasphemous and terrible of me, I know. But I've had like little bits and pieces here where I'm like, okay. Serling says that this character is in a nightmare, but is it really a nightmare? Is he really representing what the episode is going to be about for me? Am I really latching on to the right things with his narration there? But I admit that, I mean, that's nitpicking at best. And, even though I do kind of nitpick it and everything, that's not to say that the opening narrations aren't written just freaking beautifully. Like this man, Serling, had such a poetry to his writing that it's just intoxicating to hear him just sum up what we're about to see, or the character that is about to be in the Twilight Zone, so eloquently. It's so beautiful, and I don't know how someone can possess that type of talent to do that so much throughout every episode of this series. That he wrote, much less writing the whole scripts that he did. It's astounding. But having said that, even though I have nitpicked the narrations in the past, this one is right on the money. It's filled with like beautiful metaphors, like when he says that Gart is a man protected by a suit of armor held together by a single bolt, but someone just removed the bolt and left him naked, a naked target. And that's just so beautiful. That's so eloquent. And we see James Daly just sitting there, just doing his thing at his desk while Serling narrates, and you can see the pain of his life kind of starting to surface a little bit, just as he's just sitting at his desk, kind of taking in what just happened. And the way that Serling says that Gart is about to move into the Twilight Zone in a desperate search for survival, that's particularly haunting in its beauty and elegance. Just really well done, and it's gives a really strong sense of foreboding to the episode. So once Gart is on the train, we get our first look at Willoughby, and it's just a quick glimpse at it. And I was actually really surprised because I had no idea going in what exactly this episode had to offer me. But I thought it was interesting that we didn't get him in Willoughby, which obviously there were reasons for that for him not to stay in Willoughby that long, but I was really I found it really interesting when I first watched this episode that he doesn't stay there. I just kind of assumed that it would be, I kind of thought that it would go the route of him wandering into this weird other world and then spending time there and realizing that it wasn't quite the idyllic dreamland that he envisioned, and that there would be something wrong, and then maybe there would be a signature Twilight Zone twist. But I thought it was handled much better that he gradually builds up the nerve to leave the train and go to Willoughby, which I'll talk more about that in a moment. But I just like that it was introduced as a dream, so we kind of get a hint of what Willoughby has to offer and why it would be so tantalizing to someone who is so filled with stress as Gart is, and filled with stress and unhappiness, I should say. So then we see him at home, and we see him kind of relaxing with the drink after a long day, and we're introduced to his wife. And at that moment, I kind of realized, like, I wondered how this episode would compare to World of Difference or Walking Distance. So obviously, the strong comparison is for really either one. Walking Distance, I mean, they're kind of very similar episodes. There's in Walking Distance, it's about an ad executive who's fed up with his life as an ad executive who wanders into a different world than the one that he lives in, and that happens to take the form of him in his childhood hometown as a child, or not as a child, but traveling back in time to when he was a child and interfering with his growing. And here we have an ad executive who's tired of being an ad executive, who eventually wanders into what looks like an idyllic dream world. And in World of Difference, we have an actor who is confused about who he is and how he has this. I mean, it's open to interpretation, but he's manifested this reality of him being the character that he's portraying. You could argue as an escape from his normal life with his ruthless wife, which that brings me to a discussion about, or my thoughts on Gart's wife. The way that Serling writes wives in the show, and the way that the show handles wives so far, is kind of similar across the board so far. We have these kind of harpy characters who are sucking the life force from their husbands, and that's not to say that there haven't been, strong women characters. There's Nightmare as a Child and 16mm Shrine, but whenever there's a husband and wife, there seems to be this kind of, like, why aren't you, like, in line, husband kind of demeanor, or I want all of your money and I made you, and stuff like that. So in this case, we have Gart's wife, who is not quite as difficult as the other wives throughout the first season that I've seen. There's almost not a compassion there. It's funny. Like she tells him that she's sick and tired of a husband who's in a permanent state of self-pity. And at that moment, that's almost a mark against Gart. Almost. If you look at it through Gart's wife's point of view, when you consider the fact that, like, she has a husband who's mopey and is just full of self-pity all the time. He's unsatisfied with his life. And, you can see how that would kind of take a toll on a marriage and on her patience. But that's the benefit of the doubt. When you lift that benefit of the doubt from it, I mean, she's kind of miserable. She is a force of misery for Gart. I mean, granted, she has to live with him being filled with self-pity and mopey and everything, but that's because there's nothing in his life that's right. And she demonstrates a complete lack of empathy and a lack of interest in helping him get better. And she is a classic, like, character that's accustomed to a lifestyle. And if he's not an ad executive, and if he's not doing that, she's going to lose that. And that's not something that interests her, even though it's literally killing her husband. So there's kind of an interesting just dynamic at play here. And she comes out of it looking just despicable and increasing the tragedy factor for Gart at the end. But even though she is this kind of cruel and somewhat despicable person, I like the fact that Gart feels that he can tell her about Willoughby. Like there's like maybe I'm reading into it a little bit, but I like the fact that he can be mopey and filled with self-pity and be just a sad sack over it and over his life. And yet, while even though she is so, she's so cruel to him as to not want to let him do what he let him seek a more fulfilling life, because she would lose everything that she forced him to work for. I still like the fact that he can sit there and tell her that he imagined a place where he could live his life full measure and be happy. And you kind of get the sense that he's appealing to her for comfort because she's his wife. And like she tears him down after that, and that made me really sad that their relationship, like they're husband and wife, and he can't confide in her or trust her or look to her for help when he needs it. Like this whole episode is about his depression and you would argue mental illness and leading toward committing suicide. And it's so dark and sad, really. And I really like that they included or put such a spotlight on the relationship that he has with his wife. And it really brought about a way to really give depth to the character and what he's going through, because you could have just the stress of being an ad executive without needing or without wanting to be in that world, and you can have that and then have that be enough to show his life in tatters and his life is not what he wants it. But having that added bonus of having his wife be this very cruel person who he still feels he can try to connect with, while she is also demanding this lifestyle and she's demanding that she be still in this lifestyle, and so that means keeping him at arm's length in a job that he cannot function in or have any fulfillment from. And that just kind of all comes together to really show to create this really tragic character in Gart Williams, and that he can't escape anything. He doesn't have anything to live for, and that's a really sad thing to put a character through. And I also liked his kind of outburst at her, his big moment where he explains to her that he's not the person that she wants him to be, and that or the person that she's tried to make him to be. And he says he's just a regular guy, and it's incredible because he references that it's because she tried to make him that person because she has this appetite. And she says, like, she counters back with him with, where would you be if it weren't for my appetite? And it's that kind of just hit me in a way, because Gart's life has become all about the things in his life that steal his individuality from him. He's lost who he is, and he's done that by appeasing the people in his life. He has let his wife control him and become a person that he had no interest in being, or into becoming a person that he was not meant to be, something that does not suit him, that does not suit the type of person he is. And now he's stuck in this life, this high-pressured, stress-filled life and career with a woman who doesn't care enough to really let him be the person that he wants to be. And this is really, there's so much depth to this dynamic, and the fact that he would still be in this relationship. Granted, this is 1960, and divorce was not, from my understanding, I mean, I'm freaking 30 years old, but divorce at the time was more like, don't don't speak of it that much, or it wasn't anything that, it wasn't as commonplace, I guess would be what I'm trying to say, or at least that's my impression of it. But even still, like, they're not functioning in a happy marriage, and the fact that he is in this life because of her quote unquote appetite, and that because she tried to make him into a person that he's not, that speaks to Gart's character in a really positive way too, because that kind of lends a layer to his character, in which it shows that he wants to make people happy. He wants to make people happy, if that means being miserable in a career so his wife can live an elegant lifestyle, or if it's because so that he can, I don't know. It shows that he kind of puts people before his own well-being, even though that eventually leads to his downfall. That's a strong character trait to have, even if it is kind of foolish and tragic, as it were. And just from personal taste perspective, I guess, his wife's monologue to him about how she shouldn't have married him. First of all, that is just harsh. That's really harsh. And when she says that you were just born too late, and she talks about how he wants to be Huckleberry Finn and all that stuff, I don't like her acting in that scene. That's just a personal preference of mine. Like, the writing is incredible. It really gets the point across and everything, but there's something she does with her head that it seems like she's just trying a little too hard to be really angry with him, or to really exude anger at him. It's I don't know. It feels like it should be more disappointment or annoyance than outright anger. That was my read at all. I don't know. So anyway, so we have Gart kind of sitting alone after that, repeating what the conductor said to him, saying that Willoughby is a time where a man can live his life full measure. And you just really, really feel for this character. It is so sad to me that his life has come to this. And this whole episode, like I said, is about, this whole episode is kind of about Gart's mind, kind of giving him the incentive or the stones to commit suicide. And I've mentioned this before, but this episode in the show deals really interestingly with mental illness and certain like mental illness, really. Even I don't know if that's something that was conceived for or what, but it's a really interesting look at what a depressed and really troubled mind will do. If you view this episode as a man under pressure, suffering from kind of a highly depressive state, or depressive thing where his mind is, you can kind of interpret it as the dreams of Willoughby guiding him toward jumping off the train, is kind of his mind, visual representations of his mind trying to trick him or convince him that suicide is literally the only option that he has for happiness. And if you see it as the audience just seeing that visually represented with this look at Willoughby interspersed throughout the episode, but from his own personal perspective, he's coming to the realization that committing suicide is the right thing to do. This is just a really remarkable episode in that, because this episode is about mental illness and a man coming to terms with his life not being how he turned out and choosing to end his life. It's a dark episode. It's really dark and sad, and I would argue special too. This is a special episode in that it's dealing with some really, really deep themes. And yeah, it's it really spoke to me. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. It gave me a lot to consider. So as I was watching this episode for the first time, I kept like in my notes I find myself really excited to see what's going to happen after he gets off at Willoughby. Will the episode end with his retreat to Willoughby, or will there be some twist to it? Which is interesting because I really was rooting for him to go to Willoughby. I wanted him to escape his life and be in this new world. And I wonder if having A World of Difference being aired earlier in the season, I wonder if you could, I don't know, this might be a stretch, but I wonder if that was kind of a purposeful placement, because it kind of greases the wheels, or kind of gets the audience to thinking like, okay, well, I mean, that actor in A World of Difference, like, he could escape his life, and maybe Garth Williams can escape his too. And we kind of get that, like, this episode is almost exactly like A World of Difference, only the difference is that Garth kills himself. And that can kind of, like, if you watch these episodes back to back without knowing anything about him, not that, I mean, A World of Difference was a while ago, but if you watch them, you might think that, okay, well, Garth's going to escape too, but not so much. I really like the way that each stop, or each sequence of Garth on the train brings him closer to actually leaving the train. The first time, he's just confused. He doesn't understand what's going on. He wakes up in this dream world, and it's just bizarre and weird. And the second time, he tries to leave, but he's delayed because he goes back for his briefcase, which speaks volumes about his life. Like, he can't leave his real life behind, and that means he's not ready to make the no pun intended, leap to Willoughby. And then the final time is that he's ready to go. He leaves his briefcase, and he's ready to go. And I think it's pretty telling that it takes him, leaving the briefcase and saying goodbye to the ad world, that's when he can finally get off the train and see Willoughby. It's just unfortunate that means killing himself. So after the second stop at Willoughby, we get another scene of Garth in his office, and we have Mr. Misrel telling him, like, screaming at him through the phone, telling him to do better than his best. And then, like, almost immediately, he's getting another call about an ad for a show, and then his secretary comes in and says that Mr. Misrel wants to see him immediately, which is crazy because he just got off the phone with him. And then, like, that secretary, man, she is just the most aggravating character in this episode. She will not shut up about Misrel wanting Garth. And I mean, you can rationalize it, and there's a clear, it tracks well within the episode that, Mr. Misrel is the most important person in this ad agency. So when you hear him, or when he is summoning you, you need to drop everything and do it. And, the secretary knows that, and the fact that Garth isn't doing it, isn't listening because he's having a little bit of a meltdown, like, that's all well and dandy and everything, but man, if I had to hear that secretary say, Mr. Misrel, Mr. Williams, Mr. Misrel, like, it's not even a complete sentence. She's just repeating the name, and it's just, I don't know. I'm like in my notes I have, that secretary, shut up. He heard you. It's just, I don't know. So I talked a lot about the juxtaposition of Garth's life at home and his life at the job, and how those are both just not satisfying to him, and they're bleeding his life force. They're making him hate his existence. And I really like the escalation of those sides of his life. Like he has, like we don't get a lot of his home life or anything, but we do have a couple scenes where he's talking to his wife or talking or trying to appeal to his wife. So we get the scene that I talked about earlier when he's discussing Willoughby with her, and then we get a scene where he is telling her to stay at home and wait for him to come home, and she just won't. She won't do it. She won't even give him the lifeline of comfort in that situation. And then on the job side of things, everything escalates so much. Like he loses a big account, or he loses not only a big account, but he loses a protege who he assigned the big account to. And then we just get harping on him all the time. Just he's being pushed. And it's something that he's already feeling sick about, and it's completely out of his element, out of his trade. Like he does not have the mental, or he does not have the tools to succeed in the ad world, and it just escalates so beautifully throughout the episode for me. I thought that was really well done. And I referenced the call to his wife after he has his meltdown and everything. And I have to admit, the first time I saw that, the first time I watched this episode, I was pretty confused about that call. And it's supposed to, it signifies that she isn't a consoling presence. And for some reason, it didn't connect with me why he was telling her to stay. Because I think that my disconnect there is I didn't know, where would she go? There was nothing to tell me that, there was nothing to tell me that she wouldn't be there when he got home. However, I guess that when he has his meltdown and he vows that he's done with the job and he quits, maybe he's just calling her because he knows that his coworker's wife is going to call her before he can get home and talk to her and everything. So there is precedent for it. But it was still kind of confusing. Because I didn't know, at that time I didn't know where the episode was heading, so I thought that maybe this was him, okay, he's done with the ad, with his career, with his ad life, and I thought maybe when he said stay there, I thought maybe he was telling her to, stay away from him. I don't know where that connection came from, it was just a thought. But when I reflected on it, when I rewatched the episode a few times, it's that moment, that scene is really heart-wrenching, because this is the moment where he is considering, deeply contemplating suicide. Whether it's consciously or subconsciously, that's up to the viewer to discern for themselves. But this is his appeal. This is his cry for help. He is he's done with his job. He is completely at his wit's end, and he calls the one person that he's sharing his life with, and he's pleading with her to stay there so that stay there so that he for when be there when he gets home. Be there when he gets home. And for him to reach out to her for help and reach out to her for her to console him, and for her to just hang up on him is just brutal. It's so sad. And it comes down to that she married a lifestyle and not a man. And that's just a really sad and really pathetic thing. And it really kind of solidifies his the tragedy of Garth Williams for me. And it's funny, so when he's on the train and he's about to, step into Willoughby, here's what I wrote in my notes when he got off the train. I wrote, "I'm really happy for Gart as he wanders through Willoughby. Is this a normal response? Should we be rooting for him, or should we want him to be happy in his real life?" And I think that that's something that I was conflicted with, in the moments before I realized that he had just killed himself. But it's an interesting thought experiment to think that, he hears this other world that seems perfect for him, but are we as the audience, are we supposed to root for him to go there to leave his life and find the solace and peace that he so desperately wants, or do we want him to be happy in his real life? Do we want him to just find another career, find another wife, and move on and live a happy life without needing to be in Willoughby? Of course, all of that is just, cast aside when you realize that Willoughby may or may not be just a representation of the afterlife for Gart, as his mind is causing him to get it in his head that suicide is the right course for him. That was my interpretation, at least. If I am way off base on this, or if people have other interpretations of it, let me know, because I'm kind of viewing this as his mind is making him okay with the fact that he should kill himself. And I thought that was a really compelling read on the episode. If you guys think of something else, then let me know. But that's the only interpretation that I can conjure up for this episode. And I have to say, when it's revealed that he jumped off the train and he died, man, that just that threw me for a loop. That just really blew me away. I have in my notes, wow, WTF, he's dead? That just shattered my world a little, and it really did, because I was so on board with the story of Gart Williams. I was really hoping that he would persevere and he would find a life that suited him and that was a happy ending. And that I am fully admitting that I know that is a completely absurd proposal for me to have in an episode of the Twilight Zone, because he's not. I mean, the odds are stacked against him. He's in an episode of the Twilight Zone. I mean, he might not have a happy ending. And I've kind of talked about this throughout it, but I just want to say again, the fact that he dies really raises some interesting questions for me. And it makes me wonder what the implications are of it, like on the rest of the episode. Like, once again, did Gart consciously commit suicide? Was this something that he was planning toward or working toward, or was this a decision that he came to consciously? Or was it just the Twilight Zone affecting his judgment, or making him think there was some oasis, a mirage of a perfect life that was leading him toward escape, but the twist of it being that the escape is him leaving the world and killing himself? The call to his wife would lead me to think that it was conscious, that he made the choice to jump and murder, not murder, but jump and commit suicide. And it makes me wonder if that last vision, that last dream on the train, makes me wonder if we as the audience are only shown that as it's like a manifestation of his mind. And if maybe I'm reaching here, but maybe there is there's something where like Gart is actually on the train and he's making the decision, like, well, Willoughby is in another world. I'm going to just go and jump off the train and be in Willoughby. Like, in his mind, like, are we in his mind seeing that manifestation, whereas he is not? It's not him being tricked into it. It's him thinking like, well, I'll be in Willoughby in one world or the other, and then killing himself. I don't know if I'm making myself that clear, or speaking that, or articulating that quite well, but I think the point stands. I kind of wonder if this was a conscious thing on Gart's part, or if it was the Twilight Zone tricking him into killing himself. I am a super pessimist, so I'm going to think that Gart consciously committed suicide. And so this is kind of getting to the end of the episode, but there's one other thing I kind of want to mention about it. So the closing scene, or the closing shot, is of the hearse loading Gart into the hearse, and then the door closes, and we see that the name of the funeral home is Willoughby and Son. And to be honest, I felt like that just wasn't really needed. I didn't really get that. Is it just a coincidence? Is it just a tongue-in-cheek thing on the Twilight Zone's part? Like, oh, hey, the name of the town is actually the name of the funeral home that's taking his dead body. Or is it meant to signify that, I don't know what it could signify, that death has a twisted sense of humor, I guess, or that maybe Gart knew about it subconsciously, and that's when his brain manifested Willoughby as an idyllic town. I don't know. I just thought that it didn't feel like it was earned, really. It felt like just a button on the whole episode that didn't need to be on it. It just felt like it wasn't earned. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing, and I don't know. It didn't really work for me. Let's see. I've kind of talked a lot about the performances throughout this review, but I just want to mention that James Daly, he has such a down-to-earth presence, and there are some moments like there's a lot of like visual cues sprinkled throughout it. At least early on, where like I said, he's favoring his stomach, signifying he has an ulcer, and like even in the opening scene, like you can really tell that there's some subtle touches to show how stressed out he is, with him like tapping his knuckles with the pencil. And I mean, there are some little pieces here and there that I don't know. It just felt like they didn't really need to have that in there, but it's a nice touch to the ambiance of the episode. So let's see. As far as cultural subtext and theme of this episode, this episode is kind of interesting in that I feel like it's, or at least I've read this here and there, that it feels like Serling is kind of working through some stuff. This character is in his late 30s. He's in a very high pressure job. He can't really take the pressure. Serling is the head of a TV show that has a lot of stress on him. He has a lot of, he's a highly sought after talent, and that's a lot of stress on someone. So maybe he's working through some stuff in this episode here. And I just, again, regarding theme and the bigger messages of it, I connected with Gart Williams so much. I really loved that character, and it's such a shame that he turned out to be such a tragic character. Because he's trapped. He knows that he's not the type of guy that he needs to be to survive in the place in his life where he is now. He's just not suited for the high pressure life, and he's compassionate and creative, and overall he's just average, and he is content with that, or he can be content with that, but his career and his wife and everything in his life is not going to let him be. And it's just, the whole episode is about a man who's been pushed into a life that is destroying him. And I think that that's a really poignant and strong and special character to draw in an episode of the Twilight Zone. I thought that it was handled extremely well and highly effective, and I think that it was really remarkable what they did with this episode. So as for trivia for this episode, there was a 2000 TV movie called For All Time with Mark Harmon that was based on this episode. Willoughby, Ohio is the only town that has the name of Willoughby in all of the United States. And in fact, they have a yearly community event involving trains in honor of a stop at Willoughby. And that community event is known as Last Stop Willoughby. Also, there's a character in Richard Linklater's movie Everybody Wants Some, which I haven't seen yet, but it looked pretty cool. The character in the movie is called Willoughby, and it's in the movie, he's a Twilight Zone fanatic and owns almost every episode on VHS. Finally, for trivia, the original draft of the story was actually considered for the pilot episode of the series, but it was eventually rejected, and then it was rewritten later, and was used for an episode toward the end of season 1. So to kind of wrap up my review, in closing, I want to say that listener Greg was totally right. This definitely broke me out of my kind of slump of mediocrity, or I don't know if I would really say mediocrity. Just I wasn't really feeling the last couple episodes of the show. So this really bounced me back, and I feel like this is just a really special episode, and it's a really strong episode, and it has a pretty remarkable character arc for a very likable and really tragic character in Garth Williams, and it's played really well by James Daly, and I really appreciate this episode, and I can see why it was Serling's favorite from season 1. Okay, now that I'm done with my review, before we move on to this week's bonus review, here's a highlight from episode 176 of The Obsessive Viewer, which is a movie and TV podcast that I host with my friends Mike and Tiny over at obsessiveviewer.com. Like, I'm a Pixar fanboy. I love Pixar. Finding Nemo is one of my favorite Pixar movies. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. It's
oh my god.
Oh yeah. Oh, I've got an ocean of puns here. Of course, you can find The Obsessive Viewer on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and at obsessiveviewer.com. And you can find the episode that you just heard a clip from at obsessiveviewer.com/OV176. All right, so as I like to do on this podcast, I'm going to kind of wind things down with a bonus review of a movie or show related to this week's episode. And this week, for the bonus review, I'm going to be reviewing, giving my brief thoughts at least, on Patterns, which was an episode of Kraft Television Theater that was performed in January of 1955, and then was actually such a big hit that a month later it was performed again for Kraft Theater, for Kraft Television at least, and a year after that, a film was released. And once again, I talked about this when I did a review of Requiem for a Heavyweight, I believe. But man, I'm just mesmerized by like classic live theater like that, live television theater, and it's just remarkable just what they can accomplish. And again, I feel like that's missing from television today. I kind of wish that there was more like dramatic live television performed. I know that ER did that at one point in its run way back in the day, but it's something that I wish would happen more, because it's really majestic when it's performed well. So anyway, Patterns was a breakout hit. It was it kind of brought Rod Serling into the inner circle of Hollywood writers and writing and television and film projects kind of lined up at the door. I think there was a quote where Serling said that, I'm going to butcher this, I don't have it in front of me, but there was a quote where Serling said that the night that Patterns premiered, the phone started ringing and it never stopped. And that's amazing. And this, I mean, the episode holds up. And by the way, you can find the entire episode on YouTube. So I'll have a link in the show notes for you to check it out. And I'm not going to spoil it in this review, but the story is about Staples, is about a character named Staples and a character named Sloan, and they're both executives in a business. So Staples is brought in, and it's kind of this dynamic shift between the two characters. Like there's some things going on that seems that makes their dynamic really compelling. And at the center of it, or at the head of everything, is this character Ramsey, who's played by Everett Sloan, who was in The Fever. And he does such a great job. He plays this really amazing, conniving, just despicable character who has no empathy, much like Mr. Misrel in A Stop at Willoughby. He's this character that is just so remorseless, and it's really amazing. And you've got that juxtaposed with Staples, who's this kind of young. He's this young executive who's green, but it has compassion, and he's conflicted throughout the episode throughout the story, because there are some things that he is morally. There are things that he is asked to do that is morally questionable, and there are certain things that he learns about his placement in the company that when he learns about this, when he learns the truth about why he's there, you can feel just how much it hurts him. And I think that that's really remarkable. And he has this kind of power struggle between his compassion and his ambition that, again, is really compelling. And it makes for a really interesting morality tale in this episode. And it kind of comes across kind of comes down to the fact that compassion doesn't belong in business. And it all comes to a head after some events transpire. And there's a sequence where the main character confronts Everett Sloane's character, and it's such an incredible scene, and it's a great monologue. It's kind of like has some shades of like some Frank Capra-esque stuff, where he's doing this impassioned monologue about how basically how just despicable this business is, and it was really well done. I really liked it, and Everett Sloane played a really great, remorseless, hard and severe, and compassionless business executive. He was a great foil for the character of Staples, and he was a great villain in the story. I won't go into much more detail about it, because I recommend checking it out, and it's so easy to find. It's on YouTube and everything, so I recommend checking it out. It's really interesting. It's really well acted, and the writing is impeccable, and you can really tell why Serling really broke through after this aired, and it made me really excited to see the film version of it. I believe the film is on Amazon Prime, available to stream on Amazon Prime. And I know that at the end of this season of Anthology and at the end of the season of Twilight Zone, I'm going to review Requiem for a Heavyweight, the film version of it. I may also review Patterns, maybe in a few weeks, but that's up in the air. But anyway, my last thought on this is kind of totally anecdotal, really. And it's that when you watch these things on YouTube and you watch they're taped off of a telecast of it, like a live broadcast, and then converted to digital, whatever. It's funny because they're from the actual broadcast, so they have cuts to commercials that are edited out and everything. Or like the cuts to commercials are ads for stuff. This particular one had ads for, I can't remember what it was now. Wow, must not have been that good. It wasn't peanut butter. It was like some kind of spread. I don't know, but it was. They did it a few times. Anyway, so at the end of it, there's kind of an ad or a plea or an announcement that for the 1955 March of Dimes to fight polio, and I thought that was really interesting, an interesting piece of history to see in the episode. Okay, so now that I kind of stumbled through all that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this episode. Thank you so much for listening, guys, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you and hearing your thoughts on A Stop at Willoughby and everything, and Patterns and all that stuff. And next week on the podcast, I am going to be reviewing The Chaser, which is episode 31 of the Twilight Zone. And I'm really excited for the bonus review for this, because the bonus review is going to be an episode of Tales from the Crypt from season 3 called Love to Death, which is based on the Tales from the Crypt comic book that used the source story for The Chaser as its as its inspiration or as an adaptation from the same short story. So I'm really excited because I've really enjoyed doing the anthology podcast and everything, and I've always like kind of thought like, oh, I wonder what would have happened if I would have done, instead of Twilight Zone, what if I would have done Tales from the Crypt and done an anthology horror podcast instead of anthology, so or at least instead of science fiction anthology. And so I'm really excited to see to see what I find in next week's episode. And of course, one final thing, I am still going strong with my bonus reviews of Black Mirror, which if you haven't watched Black Mirror yet, I highly recommend checking it out. It's really incredible. And this week's bonus review is going to be kind of nice. This bonus episode is going to be nice because I'm actually going to release it on Tuesday, which is Election Day, which the episode that I'm going to be reviewing, the Waldo moment, has some pretty interesting parallels to the current political climate, and it's about politics in general. So I really like when that kind of lines up, when real life lines up with the scheduling of the podcast. And one final thing about Black Mirror is that I'm really digging the new season, and I'm looking forward to reviewing each episode. And the episode San Junipero, episode 4, that episode kind of hit me really hard, but there's some interesting comparisons that can be made between A Stop at Willoughby and San Junipero. I don't know if I don't think it's intentional or anything, but if you liked A Stop at Willoughby, I recommend checking out at least just San Junipero, because I thought it was a really great episode. So more on that in the coming weeks. And having said all that, thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to Anthology, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. You can find more episodes at AnthologyPod.com, and you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or your preferred podcast app. If you'd like to help support the podcast, please take a few minutes to leave a rating and a review on iTunes. The more reviews I get, the higher the show will be ranked in iTunes search results, making it easier for people to discover it and grow the podcast. Of course, you can always email me your thoughts and feelings about the show to matt@obsessiveviewer.com. You can also tweet me at obsessiveviewer, like the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod, or you can call and leave me a voicemail at 317-762-6099 for a chance to have it played on the show. If you like what you've heard here, I urge you to check out The Obsessive Viewer, a weekly movie and TV podcast I host with my friends Mike and Tiny. Also check out the Obsessive Viewer blog at obsessiveviewer.com, where I write movie reviews, TV reviews, and the occasional editorial about the business of entertainment. If you want even more obsessive content in your life, subscribe to the Obsessive Viewer subreddit at r/obsessiveviewer, and check out obsessivebooknerd.com, our sister site for book reviews, author spotlights, and a general celebration of reading. Finally, if you're philosophically curious, check out my friend Tiny's side project podcast, The Secular Perspective, which explores the concepts of faith, religion, and existence from the perspective of secular hosts. You can find that at thesecularperspective.com. Once again, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.